Hi guys, and welcome to Lloyd's Lab Demo Day. Let me show you what we've got coming up. So welcome again, guys. This is the Lloyd's Lab Demo Day for the new products, which is geopolitics and IVF. So the purpose of Demo Day is to show you guys and the rest of the world what the teams on the Lloyd's Lab have been working on the past 10 weeks. And we're really excited to bring you the output of those teams from their journey in the lab. So a couple of things, please ask questions that you have for any of the teams in the chat function. So you'll find that in the comments box at the top right. And if you like the look of any of the teams, you want a connection, the team should either have their contact details on the presentations. There's also a networking feature on here that you can try out. But if all that fails, you can contact the lab and we'll be happy to put you in contact with any of the teams that you want to speak to. So just another thing before we get going is that we've also got pitch day for Cohort 7. So that's going to be coming up in a couple of weeks on the afternoons of the 28th and the 29th of July. And the invites for those will be going out soon. If you don't see those in the next couple of weeks, let us know and we'll make sure that you get it. So the themes for pitch day 7 is going to be claims, data and models, cryptocurrencies, and wildcard products. But enough about pitch day. Let's get on with the cohort from this year. So first up, we have Moonshot.
Katrina Scholes. I'm a program manager at Moonshot. Moonshot is a risk analytics firm of over 50 people based in London, Washington, DC, and Dublin. And we believe we can address the challenge faced by the insurance industry when it comes to managing and assessing man-made risk. We develop technology to identify, map, and quantify risks posed by terror, organised crime, and violence, analysing data from social media, including encrypted spaces, search engines, and the dark web. We have a well-established record of working with clients, including the US State Department, the United Nations, and many others, over the past 5.5 years of operating. Over the past 10 weeks, we've been working with a wide range of market participants to retrofit our model to the insurance industry. Through this demo, we aim to demonstrate how our analytics can be used to enhance risk selection, risk pricing, loss mitigation, and claims. We identified 3 key objectives for our solution and our work within the lab, aligned with Lloyd's future strategy, Blueprint 2. One was to provide an innovative solution. We recognise the importance of social media and the dark web data in assessing complex man-made risks, such as threat of violence or terrorism targeted at insured assets. Second, to improve access to data, to provide real-time access to data which addresses the changing nature of existing risks and empowering those assessing risk to make more dynamic decisions. And finally, to reduce costs, to provide high-quality analytics that improve pricing accuracy for underwriters and enable clients to mitigate against losses. We've had the opportunity through the lab to speak to mentors and other contacts from across the market. We've also given demos and descriptions of tools which sit within the existing suite of products available, from exposure management to reputational management tools. We've identified that there is a gap in the market for our product that is currently not being met to supplement existing products. We are unique in that we provide real-time reporting, quantitative assessments, and focus on new and emerging threats. We selected a use case to demonstrate our capabilities through the lab. We chose to focus on tailoring our technology to map and quantify the risk of property damage and business interruption in the US posed by strikes, riot, and civil commotion (SRCC) events. So the context is that in 2020 and 2021, riots had changed our understanding of SRCC in the US, with record losses recorded. It's widely understood that there is a significant impact of social media in exacerbating violent sentiment and organising violent unrest. The geographic distribution of riot activity can result in the accumulation of physical damage across many locations for large national insurers, which can have loss implications for across the market. So our goal was to deliver bespoke risk analytics to provide underwriters with previously unseen data drawn from the online space on the threat of violence towards people and property caused by SRCC at the city level. And our challenge was twofold. One, to develop the risk rating algorithm. To develop an algorithm trained on real-life historical SRCC events to understand which data points are most useful in predicting real-world violence. And second of all, delivering analytics that can inform 12-plus month policy decisions. Underwriters are in a unique position where they're making point-in-time decisions which will govern the next 12 months plus. We acknowledge that behaviour online can be erratic and at times unpredictable. Therefore, it is imperative that we could provide a stable risk profile for a location or industry that reflects whether you're seeing a spike in the risk, which can potentially be expected as part of natural fluctuation, or an ongoing trend that can be reflected in the premium. So how do we retrofit our model to the insurance market? Our first step entailed understanding which platforms and online spaces we should collect from to map where discussions containing threats of violence and property damage were taking place. We extracted data from the most relevant spaces, including mainstream platforms such as Twitter, encrypted or hard-to-reach spaces on the dark web like 8kun, and online spaces historically associated with violence such as militia forums and niche websites. We then tailored our in-house technology to digest, process, and analyse this big data at scale. This process was guided by three core questions. One, is the audience discussing or organising real-world violence against people and property? Two, are specific industries or businesses targeted? And finally, what exactly is driving the uptick in violence? We then developed a prototype dashboard to visualise our analytics, designed in partnership with our mentors. So how did we develop our risk algorithm? The purpose of the risk rating algorithm is to give us a score which reflects the likelihood of threats of violence online translating into violence against people or property in the real world. This can be used across the market to assess and mitigate risk. To develop this algorithm, we leveraged our access to historical data containing millions of data points related to events of SRCC in the US over the past year. This is a huge data source which enabled us to design, train, and test an algorithm. We identified three core factors feeding into the algorithm. First, platforms. The platforms or online spaces represent variable levels of risk. Our testing revealed that some platforms are better predictors of real-world violence. In particular, niche, more inherently violent platforms such as 4chan were better predictors and therefore carry more weight. Second of all, we looked at categories of violent discourse. We categorised the types of violent discourse we identified and analysed which was the best predictor of real-world violence. We found that language related to property damage was the best predictor of real-world violence and therefore carries more weight. And finally, the growth factor. We analysed the impact of changes in volume of discussion containing threats of violence. Perhaps unsurprisingly, we found that escalations in discussion are a strong predictor of real-world violence. The algorithm then went through multiple rounds of testing to adjust the weighting assigned to each factor to reflect the relative importance of each factor when calculating the risk score. It's important to bear in mind that this is the product of 10 weeks of testing and that we'd like to continue to train the algorithm on new and emerging events. With our model complete, we tested it against 7 historical events of SRCC in the United States. We've included the results of 3 SRCC events occurring in Washington, D.C., Kenosha, and Boston to show you how our model performed against these 3 events. The 2 scores I'd like to draw your attention to, first of all, is the overall risk score. This score looks at the overall trend in the threat picture for the city across the period, taking into account the baseline as well as periods of heightened risk. Considering clusters of days of heightened risk was particularly important, so that the final score would recognise the importance of business interruption over prolonged periods of high risk. The risk score is designed to be and stable and reflect overall trends of violent discussion. Ultimately, the user will be able to compare the overarching risk profile of a location with historical patterns or notable events. And then we have the daily risk score. This risk score indicates the daily level of risk associated with a location on a particular day. This metric is sensitive to daily changes and is therefore quite volatile, but gives an assessment of the immediate risk, which enables quick decision making, meaning that it can be used, for example, by businesses to mitigate their risk. If you look at the event in the middle of your screen, the unrest that took place in Kenosha, Wisconsin, following the shooting of Jacob Blake on August 23, 2020, which resulted in significant violence and destruction of property, resulting in an overall risk score of 5 across the period. The daily risk score was relatively low in the days prior and peaked immediately after the shooting, where real-world violence and destruction of property occurred in the following days. 2 other events we also tested is the Million MAGA March. This was organised online and took place in Washington, D.C. in November 2020 to protest the results of the 2020 election, in which some business interruption and violence occurred, and a Free Palestine protest that took place in Boston in May 2020, which was peaceful and saw no violence or disruption. Our findings based on the multiple rounds of testing over the past few weeks indicate that our algorithm was able to accurately reflect whether the events turned violent or not, and that social media is a good predictor of violence. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague Ludovica, who will show you how our prototype dashboard, which contains the online threat picture in the days surrounding the Million MAGA March in Washington, D.C.
My name is Ludovica, and today I will walk you through the prototype version of our web-based interface, which provides you with the online threat picture of all locations across the United States. So all the posts containing threats of violence in relation to physical locations across the country that we've collected feed into this dashboard. So in this overview page, we've added a series of visuals that can give you a sense of the kind of violent discussions that we're observing across the country. So first is this figure at the top, which provides you with the volume of posts containing threats of violence collected across the monitored online spaces, which is also visualized in this timeline here at the bottom, which allows you to identify peaks and drops in this discourse online. We're also providing an overall risk score, which is a value that indicates the severity of the threat of violence across the US and factors in a number of variables beyond just the volume of posts. And then finally is this map, which shows a summary of the threat of violence in various locations across the US. And in this map, the size of the dots indicate the volume of posts containing threats of violence, whereas the color shows the severity of the threat, which is reflected in the risk score. We've also enriched these data with other attributes, including these trending industries and trending topics, to allow you to examine the nature of threats across the country. And I'll take you through some of these functionalities in the city level dashboard. And then finally, also included up here are these 3 filters, which allow you to change the view to select specific time periods, for example, or specific states or specific cities. And I will use this location filter here, to select the city in the US that we have picked for this particular demo, which is Washington, D.C. And if I click over the dot related to Washington, D.C., then I navigate to the city level dashboard, which is a dashboard that basically visualizes the online threat picture for a specific city over a given time period, allowing you to understand what risk looks like and what is driving this risk. And here is the online threat picture in DC in November of 2020, which is the month where the Million MAGA March took place in the city. And there are 2 key elements of the city level dashboard that are particularly important when assessing the level of risk associated with DC in November of 2020. So the first one is this overall risk score. And this risk score indicates the threat of violence in DC for the entire month of November. And basically looks at the overall trend in the threat picture for the city, and in this case resulted in a risk of 6 out of 10. The second one is this trend in the daily location risk score, which indicates the daily level of risk associated with DC on any given day in November, and really allows you to appreciate how the score changed on a daily basis and at times in response to events in the real world, for example, the US presidential election. We've also added various attributes that enable you to drill down on the conversations taking place and further understand what the online threat picture looks like. So the first one of these is the categories of posts containing threats of violence, which we've split into three subcategories. The first one looks at whether users are mentioning any threats against properties in DC. The second one looks at mentions of acts of violence in the city. And the third one looks at discussions of the presence of violent groups still in the city of DC. And what this visual does is basically looks at the terms or phrases that were used most frequently within each of these categories, as well as the number of times that they have been used in a given time period. Also included, similarly to the overview dashboard, are the trending industries and the trending topics. For the trending industries, what these are businesses that are mentioned in posts containing threats of violence. And yet they don't really provide the full picture, of course, as these insights are meant to be combined with other sources of information when assessing risk, but they still give you an indication of which industries are more at risk based on online discussions. And they can be used, for example, to inform decisions related to whether to write risk for a particular industry in DC, as well as how to price these risks. As for the trending topics, they are meant to allow you to understand the underlying drivers of violent discussion in DC in November of 2020. And in this case, we can see that the topic of elections is the #1 trending topic for this time period, which kind of makes sense given that we retrospectively know what triggered the Million MAGA March. And clicking on elections then filters the rest of the dashboard, as you can see, and allows you to assess the risk related to this topic, as well as the social media posts that are related, in this case, to the elections, for example. And these posts, for example, can be used in post-claim interpretation of events if trying to assess whether two SRCC incidents were triggered by the same underlying grievances. I will now pass it back to Katrina so that she can walk you through how we envision underwriters and others across the market use our analytics.
So how can our analytics be used by underwriters and others across the market? We've identified two core uses. First, risk mitigation. Underwriters can use the daily risk score associated with each location to work with a client to mitigate their risk and prevent losses. Secondly, risk selection and pricing to support evidence-based, longer-term decision-making by assessing overall trends of violent discussion in relation to specific locations, which can be compared to historical trends or losses. Going forward, there are some key areas that we would like to build on. To develop our prototype user interface and user experience, to monitor threats against specific insureds, to run a low or no-cost pilot with trusted partners, to develop the product for clients to use to mitigate losses, and finally to continue to work with market participants to tailor the product to requirements.
Welcome back, guys, and thanks very much to the Moonshot team. We're now joined by Ludovica and Ross Frennett from Moonshot. Welcome, guys.
Hello.
Hi, guys.
Thanks for joining us, guys, and thanks also for all your hard work in the lab. So I think we'll crack on with some questions, if that's all right. So first of all, Jeff Moore asks that if you delve into the core ideology of the protagonist for contextual analysis to add to your data analysis.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And basically, the system that we've developed, the way it works is that our first step in the data collection is to collect any posts that include indicators of violence. So as you can see in the dashboard, that means threats against properties, threats against people, or discussions of the presence of violent groups in a particular location. So that data can then be enriched with a variety of things, and it could be enriched with the ideology behind particular violence. But at the moment, we collect just based on violence, regardless of the ideological drivers behind it.
Thank you very much. And Trevor asks whether you intend to analyze your algorithm skill using a formal statistical test.
Yeah, so it's a great question as well. I mean, after this phase of work with the lab is over, we want to continue testing against more events, using larger data sets, more historical data, so we can adjust the weight of the different variables needed. Obviously, there was a confined time period of this particular lab. Some of the statistical testing that we'd like to conduct include kind of general diagnostics of relative impact of different weights, different social media platforms, different sets of keywords on the risk score. And overall, we just want to evaluate the stability of the risks, the risk estimates over time for each location. So yes, we're going to continue to hit that quite hard. Frankly, we were surprised we managed to get as far as we did during the lab. So for us, this is by no means over. We're going to be focusing really hard on tightening this up over the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, thank you, Ross. And I mean, for those watching, 10 weeks is a very short amount of time to get this kind of stuff done. And Moonshot had come into the lab without any part of product and built the whole thing over the course of the 10 weeks. So impressive start, and we look forward to seeing what comes along. So Trevor again asks a little bit of a broader question. So whether we're expecting to see an increase in political risk and SRCC during the COVID recovery period?
Yeah, so Ludo, I don't know if do you want to try this or should I? Yeah, go for it. Yeah, we are. So what we've seen, and this maybe goes outside the remit of exactly what we were doing in this lab towards a broader, as a company, we track political risk, violent extremism, and other things like that. We've seen a lot of this bubbling under the surface for a really long time. We've seen that COVID has actually restricted the abilities of some of this stuff to express itself physically, while at the same time actually increasing the severity of some of those indicators we would normally see. So we're expecting, as things open up, that some of that steam which has been built up over time is going to start to release itself. One of the most obvious examples of this we saw as we were issuing pretty severe warnings about an uptick in white supremacy and far-right violence that started when lockdown started and really released itself on January 6th. But that's not over yet. We still see a lot of that steam still is due to be released. And this isn't just in the United States. We've been tracking this kind of stuff in Arabic, in Bangla, in Devehi, in lots of different locations around the world. And we've seen very similar patterns where lockdown has led to an increase in kind of interest in violence and disinformation of various kinds. So unfortunately, the answer is yes.
Great. I think we've got time for just one more probably. So Jessica asks what prospective time frame your predictions are valid within.
Yeah, so basically, as Katrina was explaining during the presentation, we have two separate risk scores, one that takes a look at what we're seeing in the 24 hours and gets updated literally every hour within a 24-hour time frame, and one that is the overall risk score that is not a simple average of the daily risk score that you would have seen, for example, in the previous days or weeks or months, but takes into account a number of things, because we wanted something that was reflective of the fact that, for example, if you have a few isolated incidents, it's kind of like a different scenario than if you have some incidents that lead to prolonged disruption and interruption for businesses. So when it comes to the daily risk score, it's more for quick decision making in real time. So if you want to let one of your clients know that you're seeing an uptick in violence in a certain location and they maybe should consider taking some precautionary measures, and that in kind of like prediction that is valid for that particular day. When it comes to the overall risk score, it can allow you to see, for example, if you're seeing an uptick in violence that is reflective of a broader trend that you're seeing in the previous months or years. And in that sense, I wouldn't say it's necessarily predictive in the sense that it won't tell you that something will happen on a particular day of the month, but it can give you an indication of the fact that there are some underlying tensions and discussions of violence in a particular location, and it can help you if you're either writing a new risk or if you are revising a particular policy that you already have. I hope that answered your questions.
I think it did very well. Guys, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. There is another question in the comments, so if you want to answer that yourself, please do. That'd be very helpful. But other than that, I'd like to, oh yeah, Ross has already done so. Great, thank you. Well, guys, thanks again for your time today, and thanks for all the work on the lab. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I'm sure you'll agree with me that that was pretty fascinating. So we're actually going to stick with SRCC as a theme, and our next team is Verisk Maplecroft.
Afternoon, everyone. I'm James Allen, Head of Consulting at Verisk Maplecroft. I'm excited to showcase to you the journey we've been on for the past 10 weeks as part of the Lloyd's Lab. Our main aim through the lab was to leverage our 20 years of experience working with global corporations and institutional investors to develop new political risk products for the insurance market. The current market backdrop convinced us there are growth opportunities for new insurance solutions specifically related to strikes, riots, and civil commotion, or SRCC. As we've seen in the last few years, the insurance industry and its clients are experiencing unexpected losses from SRCC events, including in historically stable places like Chile, where riots in 2019 and 2020 led to insurance industry losses of $3 billion, and the US, where the George Floyd protests cost $2.7 billion. Our view is that the risks are probably going to increase in a post-COVID world, and the industry could be looking at a $5 billion SRCC loss event in the next few years. During the lab, we initially worked with our mentors to better understand market opportunities and barriers. We decided to focus on SRCC pricing and selection and portfolio assessment as an area with commercial upside and where we could add value through our existing knowledge and risk data sets. We identified several opportunities, such as the growing SRCC losses that I referred to earlier, combined with low penetration rates and coverage levels in both major and developing insurance markets. SRCC often gets bundled with wider coverage policies, particularly property, so insurers and reinsurers may not fully appreciate the risks in their books. Clients can also quickly lose coverage entirely and at short notice after surprise events, so there seems to be opportunities to improve risk pricing and market efficiency through better modeling. Importantly, we can also move quickly in this space in light of the market-ready platforms that are out there and that we have existing relationships with. However, there are also quite a few barriers, such as limited market size, established incumbents, the value provided by better analytics, and what underwriters actually need to do their jobs. During the lab, we sought to build a model that would predict annual average loss from civil unrest from the US and Chile at the highest spatial resolution possible. We spent a lot of time compiling data for the model, and this included loss claims data from the 2020 George Floyd protests aggregated to the state level and from the 2019 Chile protests, civil unrest event data, which combines an NLP algorithm with our internal databases and third-party data, and exposure databases from the US based on cresta zones and asset level data in Chile. Using these data sets, we had three main bridges to cross through the lab. First, to predict the intensity of civil unrest events over the next 12 months. Second, to model expected loss based on the predicted intensity. And third, to calculate an annual average loss from civil unrest. So in the next few slides, we'll focus on our results from the lab and potential applications. So we've developed a model that predicts civil unrest intensity 12 months into the future. You can see the variables and the respective levels of importance on the slide here. This model is built using Verisk Maplecroft's database of 1,000 risk indicators, which in some cases go back decades. We look for the relationship between these indicators and the intensity of civil unrest, which is based on a global database of civil unrest events. The results seem to make sense. So issues that presage civil unrest relate to common grievances around food and fuel prices, police violence, corruption, upcoming elections, and poverty. And a word of warning if you're underwriting SRCC in Argentina, Colombia, the US, South Africa, and Brazil. These were the highest risk countries in our model for the next year. We've also been able to translate the intensity of civil unrest into expected claims, which we did for the US at the state level and in Chile at the national level. We developed a measure of civil unrest intensity that was correlated with claims data from the George Floyd protests. Our measure looks at both the frequency of protests and their impact based on the damage caused. We can now say that civil unrest of intensity X means a probable loss of between Y1 and Y2. You can see the results for the US here. The model data, shown in red, is well aligned with the actual loss data, shown in blue. There's always room for improvements with such models, and the more loss data we get access to, the better the model is likely to be in future. Exposure data, in this case the value of commercial property, is the next area that we want to integrate into the model. We haven't done this yet. What you can see on this slide is the US civil unrest prediction scaled by commercial property value. So for instance, Los Angeles is a high loss area because there's a lot of high value commercial property, and civil unrest there will be more damaging than something happening in rural Wisconsin, for example. We plan to integrate this exposure data into the model to reach our desired outcome of a model that provides expected loss from civil unrest for different parts of the country. We believe there are several areas where these results can add value within pricing and selection and portfolio analysis processes. Use cases within pricing and selection include providing underwriters with the ability to quickly benchmark their pricing levels and using pricing notes to justify when to apply new rates or retain existing premiums. The primary value we saw, though, is within portfolio analysis and helping companies protect their books and discover commercial opportunities. Our model should help insurers optimize their portfolios by identifying areas of concern based on current levels of risk and predicted changes over the next year. This can also be done during renewals, especially to flag if the situation could materially change. It will help insurers better understand how much SRC risk may be hiding within other coverage lines, especially property. The model could also deliver a more sophisticated view of SRCC risk within capital modeling. In terms of opportunity discovery, we think our model will identify and justify where more capacity can be deployed, such as particular regions or cities, classes of business, adjusted deductibles, etc. It could also be used for business development to help identify and engage prospective clients who may unknowingly be exposed to substantial SRCC risk. Through the lab, we identified several applications that future iterations of the model could support, such as creating a product that bundles risk management services with insurance coverages, as well as with respect to parametric products, industry loss warranties, and insurance-linked securities. Finally, as we're part of Verisk Analytics, we can embed our SRCC models into existing systems that insurers already use. So there's no need to develop or to get new clients onto yet another system. AIR's touchstone and sequence impact are the two most likely deployment pathways. Well, we've come a long way in a short space of time during the Lloyd's Lab. There are a few key steps to go as we bring our new product to market. We'll continue to improve the model, particularly through the integration of property exposure data and discrete claims data. We're continuing to have various types of discussions with potential development and commercial partners. We also need to take the next step and integrate our model within existing platforms. Finally, we're looking forward to continuing our collaboration with Lloyd's, and in September, we'll be supporting on the Future Minds program on geopolitical risk. And last but not least, we'd like to say a huge thank you to our mentors from Atrium, AXA XL, Beasley's, and Lloyd's, as well as our colleagues from PCS and AIR worldwide. We've learned a great deal from you over the past 10 weeks. We're incredibly appreciative of your time, your thoughtfulness, and your candor. Thank you.
Well, that's always nice to hear. So we're now joined by Matt, Chris, Sam, and James from Verisk. Nice to have you down.
All right.
Good. Well, we'll crack on with questions then. Don't forget, guys, if you've got any questions for the Verisk team, put them in the comments box. So first of all, Trevor asks, could your model be used to highlight how companies can take steps to protect themselves from risks?
Yes. So I guess I'll take a first stab at this. It wasn't specifically what we were looking at within the model, so like the types of attack. I think what it would help you do is if you've got lots of facilities in different places around the world, it would help you high grade those where unrest may be most likely to take place. So you could prioritize efforts to mitigate risks in those locations. I think that'd probably be the primary. use case, and then after that, once you've identified those sort of higher risk locations, you could then, not necessarily using the data, but doing additional research and try to identify, what are the particular vulnerabilities of those locations, what are the characteristics of SRCC types of events that have taken place around those locations, so get a better understanding of, what might be types of attacks might be. So you can use it in that respect, I'd say.
Yeah. I would probably just add, the more we can glean about the events themselves, the metadata tied to those, I think we'll be able to learn more about the characteristics of that. What tends to happen where? What does that look like? Is it looting? Is it property damage? The types of BI, and what sort of mitigating measures businesses can take. And it's a lot of what companies use our data for on the corporate side anyways, to try to understand this, to put more mitigation tactics in place.
Great, thanks, James. Matt. So next question, was the correlation between years of schooling and unrest positive or negative?
It was the relationship there was the lower the number of years of schooling, the greater the probability of civil unrest of a certain intensity occurring. So it's one of multiple factors there that kind of talk about, I suppose, people's unhappiness with their situation, whether it's related to education or healthcare access, or around elections or food prices or those kinds of things. So all those indicators kind of stacked up conceptually. It was about kind of an underlying grievance, which is a lot of the rationale for the riots in places like Bolivia last year, or Chile, related to presidential elections, or fairly small changes in things like metro ticket prices. So it kind of stacks up conceptually, and the model shows that there is a quantitative relationship between those variables and civil unrest actually occurring.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sam. So could the prediction of SRCC be extended to revolution and civil wars? And anything else in that kind of vein, I guess?
So we do that already. We have other models that are they're predictive models that look at the probability of state failure, so things like politicides or genocides or civil wars or coups, any kind of major government collapse. We actually have an existing data set that does that, called state instability. Unlike the work we've done in the lab, it isn't tied to loss, but it gives a probabilistic output, and it's actually a good model. CRISPR has some better examples of when it's actually done well, but yeah, it's part of our existing data set, and that's very much within our sort of general wheelhouse of our modeling skills.
Thanks. So what's the specific output or product that you're going to try and ultimately deliver as a result of all the work you've done in the lab?
You'll move to James.
Sorry. Yeah, one of the things that we're learning through the lab is kind of what's actually created, what's sold, what does a product look like, and also we're learning quite a bit about all the sort of the innovations around what can be offered as a product, as a solution, as a service, how that's all bundled together. So that part of our journey was figuring out all of that and those endpoints. I think what we ultimately wanted to do was kind of improve some of the modeling related to PV risk. And so hopefully what we've done is come up with a more representative view of risk than currently exists, because we're bringing in lots of different factors into the analysis. So we've got the event data, the predicted changes in intensity, modeling it against historic losses. That was a big step for us. And eventually we're going to bring in some of that property exposure data that we spoke about in the slide. So I guess primarily it's a new model that will provide insurers or reinsurers with a better correlation between the exposure and expected loss. We think primarily it'll be useful at the portfolio level, but then there's also some additional use cases that we mentioned, within a pricing and selection context for BD activities, and then a few more of those other areas that we mentioned that kind of came up during the lab that we'll be kind of keen to explore later on.
Yeah, great. And I guess you partly covered that in that answer, but which of those next steps are you most excited about? Or is there anything you haven't mentioned yet that you got to signal?
Yeah, I think the next step for us would be we want to bring in that exposure data, that property data, to see what that looks like, particularly at the US level. We want to see what it looks like in some of those platforms, whether that's Touchstone or SQL Impact. I think it'd be really interesting to sort of in a live kind of operating environment that insurers are actually using, and to see what kind of analysis can be run on that. The last thing, which hopefully we'll do with some development partners, is bring in a lot more granular loss data, so we can really sort of drill down even further from where what we've done so far, which is, we feel, a long way in 10 weeks, but we know there's still more to go in terms of improving the modeling and improving and seeing how it's actually used by underwriters.
Absolutely. I mean, it's come a long way already in the 10 weeks that we've had in the lab. So Alan asks, could the data be used to model customers' non-damage business interruption losses? And if so, how?
That would be related to the loss data we can get our hands on. So I believe the data that we get from our sister company PCS is all losses, and that isn't broken down by damage or business interruption. I think it's just total losses. So I think the answer to the question is it already does. It's any losses from policies that incurred losses as well, George Floyd during the George Floyd riots. So the principle is the same. We're finding things that are correlated with a particular loss, whether that's damage or business interruption. It doesn't really matter. They might have slightly different relationships, perhaps. You could argue that might be the case. But I think, in effect, the model already does take that into account.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So you talked a little bit in one of your previous answers about translating predicted intensity, and I noticed in the video that there was when you were talking about translating that intensity into loss, there was a big gap in the graph. What happened there?
It's a function of the amount of data that we can get our hands on. So that was 25, I think, state level loss data points from George Floyd. The two kind of outliers you can see on the right hand side are Minnesota and California. It just happens to be that the riots there were a lot more severe, therefore there was a lot more damage. So the losses and the hazard severity were very skewed towards that right-hand side. If we had more data, either individual losses at a policy level, or counties or cresta zones or whatever, you'd see that distribution much more filled in. So it's purely a function of the small amount of claims data that we could get our hands on.
Absolutely. Thanks for that answer. So just wanted to ask you a little bit about the competition as well. Do you know of anyone who's doing anything similar here in the UK or in the US?
Similar in terms of what we've been doing? I don't think so.
No, I mean, I think we know there's incumbents who are sort of established within the insurance market on the kind of SRCC. I think our view, and we didn't do a huge amount of analysis, is that it's probably focused on that sort of pricing and selection stage, whereas we're looking to provide value more on that sort of portfolio analysis, accumulation analysis, aggregation kind of level. We know that the sister companies, so PCS, have been doing a lot of work looking into this. We've been helping with the research, so that's probably the closest that we're aware of is doing things that are similar to us. I'm sure there's other organizations out there as well, because I think I think people are realizing, even though it's quite a relatively small market, the level of risk is growing significantly. So I think with that, there's going to be more opportunities for players such as us and others to kind of come into it as the rewards of doing better modeling and supporting the industry become clearer.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's pretty much all we have time for. So guys, I just want to thank you for your time today, answering all the questions, and also for your time on the lab. I really appreciate it.
Great.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Jake. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. So actually, Verisk and Moonshot, who were in the first presentation, actually did one of our Spotlight series, which is a fascinating talk on geopolitics and the tensions around sort of COVID-19 on the offline and the online space. So if you want to see that and hear some of their fascinating insights, by all means get in touch with us and we can share with you that recording. another little plug before we get to our final one, which is, some of you may know already, but if you don't, Lloyd's actually has an innovation class. So it was launched last year, and it means that Lloyd's syndicates can write an additional 2% of their plan for innovative products. It's fairly flexible to use, but if you want to find out any more about that, please do get in contact with us, and we're happy to share more about that, because it's a great initiative that you should really take advantage of if you can. So finally, we have Gaia, who were in the lab as part of our wildcard category originally, but have built out a product for IVF and fit in nicely with the other two geopolitics teams who built out products as well. So without further ado, I will let Ines tell you a little bit about what Gaia have been up to.
Hello everyone, I'm Ines Chef, the CEO of Gaia, and today I'm going to walk you through who we are, what we do, and our journey in the Lloyd's lab to build the first IVF insurance product. So let me start from the top. We believe that in the past 5 to 10 years, the family as a social construct has completely changed and will continue to do so. But the path to parenthood hasn't. It's just become far less linear and much more difficult. More and more people are struggling to conceive, mostly because women are starting families later in life, but also same-sex couples are starting families themselves, which has led to an increase in demand for IVF as an assisted reproductive technology. And IVF is a good solution, but a very complicated one. First, it's very expensive. But what's really difficult about it is how uncertain it is. You basically have to gamble £5,000 every time you go through treatment for only 25% success rate, which is the reason why so many people stop in the middle of treatment after having spent tens of thousands of pounds on treatment without even having a baby in the end. And this is actually where Gaia started, out of personal experience of our founder and CEO, Nader, who went through several cycles of unsuccessful IVF and a round of IVF and decided to take the guesswork out of getting pregnant. So we built a predictive model out of the world's largest and most comprehensive data set of 1.3 million IVF cycle over 35 years. And based on personal data on the patient, we can predict the chances of success after a successive round of IVF and pinpoint the optimal number of cycles to be successful and have a live birth. And so because we can measure the chances of success, we can also measure the risk of failure and price against this risk. So our solution is an embedded insurance and financing solution at the point of sale, which is the clinic. And typically the patient journey is as follows. A patient that's struggling to conceive would consult a clinic that would ultimately recommend them for IVF and refer us as their financing and insurance partner. So instead of paying upfront for a very expensive treatment, they would go to us and we would recommend them for a certain amount of rounds. We would pay as they go the clinic for every treatment, and they would pay us monthly back for both the treatment and the insurance. So what we're building here is a very unique insurance use case, because not only are we helping patients create life, but we're also absolutely aligned with them. We don't want to pay them back. They don't want to be paid either, because all they want is a baby. So no moral hazard here. And because we gather medical and personal data at the onset of the product design, there's never any information asymmetry. So for insurance, this is very, very unique. But it's unique, but it's also very new. We're not like innovating in distributing a car insurance or simplifying claim. We're actually creating a completely new product category on a risk that no one has ever priced, on a process that's so complicated, even for people that went through this. And as explained before, a very vulnerable consumer. So this looks for an insurer like a perfect storm. And this is probably why this has never been built by insurers. And this is also why we have built it, because we have no experience in insurance. And so this is why we joined the lab, because we wanted to figure out how to design a simple insurance product for a very complicated journey and treatment. So we worked with our mentors that are potential capacity providers, and very grateful for these sessions and connection to figure out how we can make this work. So we started by basically working, at least for 4 weeks. We didn't expect that at the start, but just deep dive into what is IVF, what is Gaia, what's so specific about it. Then we dived into product design after approximately 4 weeks. The key here was to really play on our strengths, no more hazards, the fact that we're actually helping doing something good, and mitigating all the insurance risks that can be visible from the outside. And after we nailed the product design, everything specific to insurance, like the claim process and everything, was much more straightforward, actually. So a little snapshot of what we landed on. The key here to our product design is that we completely separated insurance and finance. So we define, based on the number of cycles we would cover, a treatment period. And during this whole treatment period, the member only pays for insurance, and we pay the clinic as they go through the different cycles. At the end of this treatment period, there is only two scenarios. Either there's a live birth or there's no live birth. It's binary. If there's a live birth, then everyone's happy, no claim for the insurer, and the member pays us back monthly. If there's no live birth, in that case, it's a claim scenario, and the insurer pays us back the treatment cost that we pay the clinic. So a basic policy outline would look like this. We would cover a couple with a designated woman or a woman with a sperm donor to go through a certain amount of cycles that we would have recommended for like a proportionate amount of time. And the insured peril is no live birth, which is defined by the failure of a certain amount of cycles. And the benefits of this policy is 100% refund of the cost to Gaia. So then we can plug this into what we do best, designing a superior experience to consumer that simplifies and transforms the IVF experience through insurance. Then what's next? We're launching the first IVF insurance product, a pilot of it. And by doing so, we'll be able to collect close to 1,000 of data points per treatment per couple, which would allow us to really even more understand success rate and the different decision process during treatment to further align with the consumer and actually strengthen the insurance product. And after IVF, we can go to many more actually products in fertility, from stem cell insurance to surrogacy, or even pooling the risk across a population that is much more fertile by covering preventive products such as embryo or egg freezing, where basically instead of selling a car insurance before the car crash, you would sell it before knowing you have a problem. So at the moment you buy the car, and ultimately, because you're putting across a wider population, making the product and fertility care much more accessible and affordable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inez. And now we're joined by the real in-person Inez. Well, remotely, at least. Inez, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dave.
So first, I just want to ask you a couple of questions that we had come in by email previously. Does the chosen clinic affect the success rate?
Yes, absolutely it does. And
Much less than actually clinics would publish, because the regulator actually asks the clinic to publish their success rate. But the success rate depends so much on the age typically of the patient, and some clinics wouldn't accept some age groups, so it's kind of skewed. So it does affect the success rate, mostly because different doctors would have different protocols, and different clinics work with different labs that have more or less efficiency on embryology. So we take all this into account, obviously.
I was going to ask whether it was built in, but
Yeah.
Great. So Trevor asks whether you intend to add support services to the product for the community, because obviously a really emotive subject that you're tackling, and much more than just the financial aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's much more than the financial aspect, but we believe that solving the financial kind of costs will help a lot psychologically as well, because you kind of have a path towards a successful IVF treatment, and at least you wouldn't lose all the money even if you're unsuccessful. So we plan indeed to have support services from fertility nurses, as well as the whole community in general. It's already a community that's pretty strong through social media in general, and we want to create that within the members as well.
Great, thanks. So, I mean, I don't know if you've got any customer feedback from your product already. I mean, is that something you've got? Can you share it with that with us?
Yes, actually, we built a waiting list before the launch of the product. It's interesting because there's something very specific about IVF, and our product specifically, because there's a sense of urgency in buying the product, because what we're doing here is allowing people to start treatment now, just because there's so much initial costs if you go through the normal path to the clinic. What we're doing is allowing them to start, and because time is of the essence for women, particularly because age is a big factor, we actually are seeing a lot of traction now, before even having launched, and without any marketing kind of initiative or investment. So yeah, we're having a few hundreds waiting for the product to be launched.
No, I'm pleased to hear it. And I guess, like you said, the earlier they do it, the higher the chance of success. I think that's
exactly.
So
yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm saying that interestingly, what we're doing here is we're forecasting the success rates based on historical data, but structurally and organically, we hope to improve the success rates, just because we allow people to go through treatment quicker, and hence get to their most optimal cycle much earlier than they would have otherwise, mostly due to the financial barrier.
Yeah, because as I understand it, there's a lot of delays between cycles where people save up or try and find the money, or
exactly
that kind of thing. Okay, great. Well, we've got a question from Matt, who asks what territory you're looking to target first, and why.
The UK is the first one, and it's what's interesting is that the structure of the market is easy to explore, because it's very concentrated in England. So, you have probably 120 clinics in the UK, and they are our distribution channels, so it's actually pretty easy to go through that. And most of the market is in London. It's about 30 clinics. So that's our target number one. And after this, we might go and explore Spain and Greece, which are big markets in Europe, but our priority will be the US, because that's where it's really the biggest market. And in terms of value, multiply the UK by 5 per treatment, and this is what you can expect. So yeah, US is next, basically.
I imagine you have a few more wrinkles with a US product, the healthcare system being set up slightly differently.
Exactly.
Cool. So I don't know if you know if anyone's actually already doing something like this here or in the US. So
something like this, no. In
you have alternatives. So probably in the UK, what you can compare it to is something, it's actually not comparable, but for the sake of this exercise, I will, I will compare it. It is multi-packages at clinics where you have kind of discount if you have several cycles, but you still pay upfront, and the refund options aren't very satisfactory. And you also pay for something you don't necessarily do because it's multi-packages. In the US, you have two interesting companies. One is called Future Family, and they do financing for IVF, so only a loan, basically. So that's part of our product, but obviously not the insurance part. And there is another one that some people compare us to. It's called Cohort Fertility, but what they do is they are kind of a TPA, third-party administrator. So everyone in insurance here would recognize. So they just operate benefits around fertility treatments in the US for employers, big employers. But yeah, they're in the space as well.
Thanks, Ines. The other question, I guess, is, and for all those people who are on that wait list, I guess, when do you plan on launching?
Well, hopefully Q3. No, Q3 is now, right? September. So after summer, hopefully we'll launch our product.
Brilliant. Well, I'm sure everyone's very excited. I'm certainly am. I think it's great what you're doing.
Thank you.
Guys, if you've got any more questions for Ines or Gaia, please do let us know. But if not, we'll let Ines go. We'll wait for a couple of seconds and see if anyone's got anything burning. Actually, while we wait, I can let them know that Gaia and Ines are actually doing a spotlight session with the Lloyd's Lab, and that's going to be on the 22nd of July. So that'll be really interesting to listen to them and see them present on what it is you're doing. So if you want to watch that, please do let us know at the Lloyd's Lab. I think you can find it on the Lloyd's Lab website and register that there as well. Cool. Well, I mean, I don't think we've got any more questions, but guys, if you want to hear anything from Gaia and Ines, let us know and we can provide the contact details, or Ines, you can pop it in the chat if anyone wants to reach out to you. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add before we let you go.
No, all good. Thank you very much for everything. Actually, very grateful for especially the support of all our mentors. We reached like very good results from the program.
Yeah, no, we're very excited to see what you guys do next, and we're very glad to have had you in the lab. And thanks for all your hard work as well.
Cheers.
Cool. Bye, Ines.
Bye.
Cool. Well, thanks guys for joining us today. That's all we've got for you right now. We've actually got one more demo day session that follows this one after a short break. So the final session kicks off at 3:30. So enough time for you to get yourself a cup of tea, a glass of water, stretch your legs, or whatever it is you want to do. And that final session will be on decarbonisation and climate risks. And we've got 3 teams for you then. So hopefully we'll see you then. But thank you everyone for watching, and see you soon.